Donald Trump is cooking the books on tariffs, on jobs numbers, on growth and GDP, and appellate court judges have today expressed broad skepticism over his legal rationale for his most expansive round of tariffs yet. Members of the 11-judge panel on the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Federal Circuit of Washington appeared unconvinced by the Trump regime's insistence that the president could impose tariffs without congressional approval, and it hammered its invocation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to do so. Yes, today, Trump has randomly granted Mexico a 90-day extension to finalize a trade agreement, raising expectations that similar reprieves could be announced for other countries facing steep U.S. import tariffs set to go into effect this Friday. And let's be clear, it's the American consumers and importers that pay the tariffs. Mexico is not paying the tariff. But still, everybody has to play along and play Trump's game to let him feel like he's had success at closing a deal. Originally granted a 90-day window to strike a deal, Mexico had already received one extension. Trump attributed the latest delay to the complexity of the bilateral trade relationship. Writing on his Truth Social platform, "We will be talking to Mexico over the next 90 days with the goal of signing a trade deal somewhere within the 90-day period of time or longer." Just weeks ago, he threatened both the European Union and Mexico with 30% tariffs on most exports to the US starting August 1st. However, he settled on a new agreement with Ursula von der Leyen at the meeting in Scotland for the European Union, setting a 15% baseline rate. He announced it as a win, except she kept quiet, knowing she has to go back to the European Union and have the members vote on it. Under this new extension, Mexico's current tariffs, 25% on automobiles and 50% on metals such as steel and aluminium and copper, will remain in place for another 3 months, it seems. Trump said the decision followed a productive phone call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, highlighting the unique challenges and opportunities presented by the shared border. Sheinbaum is basically not giving way. In fact, she's one of the few politicians to stand up to Donald Trump and seems to be having some success with that. He also claimed that Mexico had agreed to eliminate a number of non-tariff trade barriers. Those specifics were not provided. It's very hard not to laugh at this. These types of barriers can include regulatory hurdles, standards enforcement, and administrative red tape. All things that Trump doesn't understand. Now, while some critics have mocked Trump for repeatedly backing off hard deadlines, Taco Trump, others point to the recent deal struck supposedly with Japan and South Korea as evidence that his pressure tactics are yielding results. Trump's embarrassing trade strategy, where he literally said out loud that he chooses the percentage number based on a vibe and how they have treated us, is facing legal scrutiny. The Federal Appeals Court is expected to hear challenges from American businesses and state officials who argue that many of the tariffs lack legal justification, just one day before the latest round of import duties is scheduled to kick in. Trump also said that South Korea would contribute $350 billion for investments owned and controlled by the U.S. and purchase $100 billion in liquefied natural gas and other energy products. That's simply not true. South Korea's entire GDP does not allow for that kind of investment. He claimed the European Union had agreed to buy $750 billion worth of U.S. energy and invest $600 billion more than it already is in America, as well as make a major military equipment purchase. None of that has been confirmed. None of that is true. Ursula von der Leyen has a mandate to negotiate because the European Commission handles trade for member countries, but the Commission now has to present the deal to member states and EU lawmakers who ultimately are going to decide whether or not to approve it. Didn't stop Trump announcing it, though, did it? And then there's the concern that Trump is cooking the books when it comes to statistics. Now, he just makes up numbers like eggs are down 400% and gasoline is $1.99. He's realized that he can do that with government data and get little pushback from the corporate media. From jobs numbers and growth, GDP, health stats, even measles numbers, they now all have to go through the White House. He's basically gutted federal statistics agencies, and consequently nearly 90% of economists recently surveyed by Reuters are concerned about the reliability of official government data on the economy. From July 11 through 24th, Reuters polled economists, including Nobel laureates, former policymakers, academics from top US universities, and economists from major banks, consultancies, and think tanks, and found that 89 out of 100 of them were concerned about the quality of official US economic data, with 41 saying they are very concerned. The Reuters report shows that alarm over Trump's cuts to key agencies that collect and deliver data, such as statistics on jobs and inflation, to say nothing of other data impacted by Trump, such as that on health and weather and education, has now reached fever pitch. Remember, on April 2nd, Trump declared a global liberation day, promising to impose reciprocal tariffs on any country he believed had exploited the US through unfair trade practices. Remember, he doesn't quite understand what international trade is. He thinks that if they're buying less from him than he buys from them, then they're ripping him off. Doesn't take into account the fact that the US has a much larger economy than every other country and therefore has greater needs. China has a separate deadline of August 12th, and while a temporary extension of the current truce has been discussed, it's yet to be finalized by the White House. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said negotiations with Beijing were nearing completion, and Trump indicated a deal with Australia was also close. Meanwhile, the Commerce Department reported progress with Cambodia and Thailand. Nothing solid, nothing concrete. Everything with Trump is performative. Brazil faces a potential 50% tariff unless it stops what Trump described as a witch hunt against former President Jair Bolsonaro, who copied Trump's insurrection but got caught. Canada, too, is at risk, facing a 35% tariff. In fact, Trump has issued a stern warning to Canada following its stated intention to recognize a Palestinian state. Mark Carney announced on Wednesday that Canada would consider recognizing Palestinian statehood at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly in September, on the condition that the Palestinian Authority meets several key benchmarks, including demilitarization and the holding of free elections without Hamas involvement. This aligns Canada with several of its allies, including France and the United Kingdom, which have already moved towards similar recognition. But back to tariffs. Today they announced a US trade deal with Thailand and Cambodia, which followed Trump's demand that the two sides end the military skirmishes that broke out last week. Can you believe that he's actually trying to do military diplomacy by threatening people with tariffs? This is ridiculous, and yet this is all Trump knows to do. He is a property developer that deals in transactional relationships. He is clearly not a diplomat. And during a press conference last month, the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, explained why we mustn't take for granted having good data on the economy. This information, he pointed out, doesn't just help the Fed. It helps the government, it helps Congress, it helps the executive branch. And more importantly, really, it helps businesses. They need to know what's going on in the economy. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.meidastouch.com. All 100% USA union made.